And you are watching On Point. Today we have 3 on points. On point 1 is on India cutting the red tape for easier visas to Chinese professionals. On point 2 is on aviation minister elucidating steps the government has taken to reform the sector. On point 3 is on Austria banning headscarves for girls in schools. And now let's take a quick look at the headlines. CBI team to leave for Thailand to bring back Goa club owners from Bangkok to Delhi. CBI team to take Luthra brothers custody on Monday. In Andhra Pradesh, at least 9 people died and 22 were injured after a bus fell off a road and turned turtle in Alluri district. The Supreme Court refuses to modify its order suspending the one-man inquiry commission and the SIT investigating the Karur stampede that killed 41 people. India has cut red tape to speed businesses' visas for Chinese professionals. A big step to boost bilateral ties and end chronic delays that cost output worth billions of dollars because of scarce technicians, according to Reuters report. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi cautiously rekindles the ties with Beijing in the face of punishing US tariffs, government officials told Reuters that New Delhi has dropped a layer of bureaucratic scrutiny and shortened visa approval time to less than a month. After a border clash between India and China in the Himalayan region in 2020, India had tightened scrutiny on most Chinese visits, expanding checks beyond the foreign and home ministries. That approach has now been relaxed. Think tank, the Observer Research Foundation, as quoted by Reuters, estimates that tough scrutiny led to production losses of 15 billion over 4 years to Indian electronic makers, which import key machinery from China to make mobile telephones. The issue around securing visa have now been completely resolved, Reuters quoted as one of the officials with the knowledge of matter. Industry executives have said such curbs hit their plans to expand in India, while the solar industry was also hit by shortages of skilled labour. The removal of red tape comes after Prime Minister Modi visited China in 2025 for the first time in 7 years, meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping and discussing ways to improve ties. After the visit, both countries resumed direct flights for the first time since 2020. The easing of curbs was prompted by a high-level committee headed by a former Cabinet Secretary Rajiv Gauba, now a member of the top government think tank, which also aims to ease investment curbs in China that hurt foreign investor sentiments. India's warmer tie with China followed the surprise levy of 50% tariff on Indian goods by US President Donald Trump. It prompted India to reshape its diplomatic calculus, reworking ties with China and strengthening ties with Russia while continuing to negotiate a trade deal with Washington. Chinese expatriate workers in India primarily concentrated in manufacturing, infrastructure and technology sectors, with estimates ranging from 5,000 to 7,000 professionals most years. Most Chinese expatriates are in India on a temporary basis, working in sectors like manufacturing, IT, infrastructure and business services. The community is mostly concentrated in Mumbai, Gurgaon and Bengaluru. Now this raises some pertinent questions. How do we see this recalibration? That's question number 1. Is it possible to bridge trade deficit with Beijing? That's question number 2. And is it a thaw or management of a frozen conflict? On this issue, I am joined by Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee and Professor Swaran Singh from JNU. Let me straight away go to Ambassador Mukherjee. Madam, my question is it a thaw or should we see it as a management of a frozen conflict?
I think, Kartik here, and congratulations for a very intelligent and tricky question. I would stick my neck out and say that it is a thaw, definitely. And why is it a thaw? It is a thaw because of its emerging global disorder, which means that India has to recalibrate its old position, look anew at its strategic autonomy, and see how it can push forward at its present rate of development to become Viksit Bharat in 2047 by recalibrating, and one of the recalibration's important elements is China. So this is something that had to be done. It needed to be done by a very popular leader like our Prime Minister, and it needed to be done by somebody who understands the global disorder and understands how to navigate through the global disorder until it emerges into a global order. That's the way I would look at it, Patrick.
Okay. Professor Swaran Singh, is it a thaw or a management of a frozen conflict? Then I'll move to the next part of the conversation, sir.
I think clearly visas have been an important instrument that India has repeatedly used in indicating displeasure or resuming of rapprochement. More recently, last 25 years or so, when from early 2000s, trade and tourism expanded between these two countries, the visas numbers grew up much faster. And in that context, Prime Minister, in a speech in Tsinghua University, I think in May of 2015, had unilaterally announced granting e-visas to Chinese. And the peak period for granting visas to Chinese was 2019, when again India has made a unilateral liberalization proposal of saying e-visas for tourism, for medical, for conferences, for business, and for longer periods from 1 year to 5 years. So India has repeatedly utilized this visa as an instrument of expressing the kind of relationship it wants with Chinese. And in that context, we are noticing that after the September meeting of Prime Minister Modi with the Chinese President in Tianjin, there has been resumption of flights, and therefore also now I think again what MEA calls a fully functional granting of visas, both e-visas and hard copies. But there are some issues. For example, recently one Indian citizen born in Arunachal Pradesh traveling from UK to Japan became an issue. So these irritants often don't show up, but there's a cyclical mode that you can see in entire history of 80 years when visas have become difficult for Chinese to come to India, and when India had made unilateral gestures of this nature.
Okay. Ambassador Mukherjee, China made the best of American globalization. They trained their country, they trained their human resource personnel, it brought prosperity, they took away manufacturing for them. You know, America can't even produce enough ships and missiles, and the way that China is producing them in both defense, civilian sectors. And you must have read, madam, that, you know, they made $1 trillion in surplus, you know, surpassing every country. So in that context, my question to you, madam, is, does this embrace benefits us, or should it be a sort of a cautious embrace, keeping in mind that Chinese manufacturing, AI and their ability to embed bugs and sensitive technology is immense?
Well, I would say first of all, Kartikeya, that the manner in which President Trump imposed tariffs upon us, we are an emerging economy, we are 1.4 billion people. It really did not leave us with much option but to recalibrate, as I said in my earlier response. Secondly, his tariffs actually have resulted in some of the most important strategic partners of the United States, and that includes India, to move closer to what should be recognized by Trump as US's greatest adversary, that is China. In other words, his tariffs are actually strengthening China's position in the world vis-a-vis the United States, because it is pushing United States friends and allies into such a difficult position that they are forced to recalibrate in order to ensure the development of their nation state and their people. Under those circumstances, I would say that if we manage this properly, and I am confident we will do so because we have so many China experts, including Professor Swaran Singh, who is with us today, we will ensure that we take this forward in a manner in which we also protect our core national state, and we do not forget that Pakistan is a satellite state. I always call it. You can call it something better here, but we should not forget that Pakistan is virtually a satellite state of China, and Pakistan is our adversary. So we have to balance our way in this over, but also understand that China too understands it needs a certain recalibration of its ties with India because it is also facing huge difficulties because of Trump's policies. So it's not just India that is affected. China is deeply impacted, which is why it took the decision it did on rare earth minerals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done what they did. So they have also recalibrated, and we are both Asian states. We are both neighboring countries. So there is no reason at all why we should be chosen in a state of perpetual antagonism. If we can recalibrate and bring about a thaw, it would be good because it would ensure that we would not be in a vulnerable position next time there is a Himalayan adventure.
Uh, Absolutely. Professor Swaran Singh, generally people tend to see any movement in the domain of economy or in the domain of people to people movement, and attempt is to hyphenate with the pending or an issue which has been kept pending purposefully by China, border. So should we say that that has to be seen separately, not in this light? It's a completely different issue which remains frozen by China purposefully?
I think understandably China believes that they are the stronger party in that asymmetric relationship, and therefore the Chinese perspective on the border is by saying that no single issue should be allowed to hold the entire relationship hostage. India has a very different take on it. India believes that relations cannot be normal as long as border is not
Precisely.
normalized. But when you spoke of $1 trillion of trade surplus in first 11 months for the Chinese,
Yes.
one has to remember there is a nearly $1 trillion deficit when it comes to United States. And these two inordinately large-sized economies, 20 trillion on one side and 28 trillion on the other, they themselves have nearly $300 billion of deficit among themselves. And that's not a very stable situation. That's not a stable reality. And I just want to underline a very important fact from history that you would remember the opium wars were results of trade deficit. So it's not a good relationship even for Chinese to have that trade surplus. A balanced trade with most countries is excellent. Otherwise, a persistent, perennial, large-size deficit leads to desperate measures and leads to suspicions. And I hope that between these large-sized economies, $1 trillion of trade surplus versus trade deficit should not really
Professor
land
Swaran
us.
Singh, is this the reason that the new national security strategy document of the United States of America talks about reviving the Monroe Doctrine, and on Thursday evening, President of the United States said Ukraine war could lead to a larger global conflict? Do you think it's primarily emanating from trade issues which America is facing?
There is no doubt if there is one single issue that has really disturbed the presidency of Donald Trump, it is his concerns about trade deficit. And therefore, he's been trying all kinds of desperate measures to deal with that using tariff hikes and so on. But when it comes to his revoking of Monroe Doctrine, I think that's going back to saying that American continent is for the United States as sphere of influence. To me, that national security strategy seemed to both take the vision backdated to 200 years and narrow it down to a very specific region, saying that he's no longer very interested in Ukraine war and he wants to end it as soon as possible, even with lot of propitiation of President Putin. So in that sense, to me, that document is a reflection of, I think, a very dated mindset rather than United States reasserting its global leadership to stand against Chinese challenge. Chinese would love to see that United States starts deserting global responsibilities and shrink itself to, at best, Caribbean, Latin America. That's not, again, a good sign for global stability. A more balanced geopolitics, a more balanced economic relationships, I think, is what one aspires to see, to bring prosperity to everybody. But here it seems the Chinese are continuously trying to take that space of global leadership, and in that sense, constant desertion of global responsibilities and walking away from responsibilities that has sustained United States as global leader, is perhaps again is a sign of instability, and the kind of rapid pace of seeking some kind of hammering out of a ceasefire, end of war in Ukraine. It seems also very externally driven, and in that sense, I hope it will be sustainable on the ground.
So this is the reason why America wants to hammer out a deal with China. But Ambassador Mukherjee, I know this is not directly linked with this, but as Professor Swaran Singh was elucidating his point, one thing struck me. But who is responsible for the deindustrialization in America, madam? It's their own companies. It's their own monopoly capitalism. So there were, I think, 92 companies by 1970s in defense. Today there are 5 companies making entire defense equipment for American military. You look at tech, all the smaller companies have been gobbled up, Instagram, WhatsApp by one company. So who is to blame? Americans themselves, their monopoly capitalism, which has led to their own deindustrialization, madam?
Absolutely. And the weaponization of tariffs will also result in the long run in their industry suffering, because it will stop highly skilled people from India, etc., going to US, and they don't have the skilled manpower to replace them. So I would say that this is actually, as Professor Swaran Singh said, going back to the Mamata doctrine. It's completely dated. It's going to go against the United States interests. Similarly, his weaponization of tariffs ultimately is going to work against US interests, US trade, US strategic balance, and on top of that, if US is going to retreat, it will weaken the West, weaken European Union, weaken NATO, and will strengthen China. So in other words, what he is doing is, he's taking measures which will, in the long run, not result in a G2 at all, but in a G1, where United States will not be G1, China will be G1. There will be no G2. He talks about G2. To talk of G2, he must have much more balance with China. The way he is going, he is rapidly losing that balance, be it trade, be it geopolitics, be it an ideology, be it in his whole approach towards Asians, be they the Koreans whom he sent back, the workers. I would call it semi-racist. His approach to Indians, the whole MAGA group's approach to highly qualified Indians, is also racist. In other words, this kind of xenophobia and racism and weaponization of tariffs is going to work against the United States in the middle and long term, and will work in China's favor. So I do hope that he listens to his advisors and changes his policy, because Monroe Doctrine is not the doctrine for the United States in 2025.
Professor Swaran Singh, you made a point that China thinks that it is more powerful than India. If you look at the economy, if you look at its army, yes, they are bigger size-wise. But there's a series of articles which New York Times has started. They are producing those articles, and the articles are written by the New York Times editorial board, and I think they are being dropped every 48 hours. I have read 2 of them, and 2 things stuck. The first was a review of the overmatched review, which was prepared for the Biden administration and subsequently shared with the Trump administration. And I think the Pete Hegseth was the one who gave the presentation. Every time they did a sort of a simulation of military simulation between China and America in terms of a war. In that simulation, America lost all the times. And they said they had built redundancy after redundancy after redundancy, and I'm quoting NYT editorial board, not my original words. The second article that came out, they had given a projection of the military. By 2030, in every naval aspect, the Chinese Navy will be far bigger than the American Navy. And the American power was projected through their Navy in this century, not through aircraft, not through the military, by their Navy. And the article argued that all they were building today are the dud aircraft carriers, $12 billion each, like Gerald Ford, which they have deployed in Venezuela. And whereas the Chinese are building all sorts of cheap missiles, all sorts of cheap drones, which can take the entire armada down. In that context, what should be our priority? what should be our concern? And Ambassador Mukherjee, the same question to you once Professor Swaran Singh tackles this question. With this asymmetry which will come into existence, breathing right in front of us, what are the choices we must exercise?
First of all, I am not even thinking that there is a possibility of a direct war between the United States and China. Second, all likely scenarios that projections are showing could be a war in, Taiwan Straits. So China is not going all the way to fight United States in its own, periphery. United States will be likely to come here. So that is a very complex picture, and neither China has won any clear war in its history, nor the United States in last 80 years. But what should India do in such an unstable situation is to focus on indigenization and become much more independent in its defense production. India has been trying to do that, particularly working together with Russia for last 20-25 years now. Because as India emerges as a major economy, and we are hoping and we are aiming that we'll reach about $30 trillion economy by 2047, the path to that goal to be achieved will be full of confrontations and tensions with all major powers that are, who will not be comfortable to make space for India, and therefore continuously our dependence, especially in critical technologies, defense technologies, on any of these could become a limitation of India. And I think that we are noticing increasingly that Ministry of Defense perhaps has already listed about 800 items that must be produced within the country. So increasing focus on indigenization, and until we reach there, diversification for defense technology is what India
But Professor Swaran Singh, that's where the challenge is. Our manufacturing has not gone up. I mean, so the hard facts are that it's there. Manufacturing has not seen uptake. Ambassador Mukherjee. And I was not talking in context of war. Actually, I was talking in context of asymmetry. I mean, so there might not be any war, but there is an asymmetry. Ambassador Mukherjee.
I am not really sure whether I agree with this analysis that there is an asymmetry right now. I would say yes, the way they are going, there could be an asymmetry. But what is important is, will China take advantage of the situation, let's say by the end of next year, when Trump would probably get smashed in the midterm, to cause problems in the case of Taiwan and actually cover Taiwan?
Yes.
Now, their main constraint
Yes.
is actually totally nationalist, which is that a Han civilization does not kill another Han. That's their problem. That is what is holding them back on Taiwan, actually. Because these are not foreigners in Taiwan. These are all mainly Chinese who went to Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek. So the issue here is that what will they do in Taiwan, and what will Trump do in case they challenge him in Taiwan? He is very, very ambiguous with regard to Taiwan. The other issue is, if they start making threatening noises with Japan, as they have recently, what is Trump going to do? Will he leave the Japanese high and dry and stranded, or will he come to their aid? These are all issues which need to be thought over carefully by American policymakers and those who have some access to President Trump's inner circle. As far as we are concerned, we need to rapidly militarize. I'm sorry to sound like an aggressive hawk on this matter, but we need to aggressively militarize. We need to reduce the imbalance between China and India, which is enormous. We need to have a situation whereby China does not take any advantage in taking us on militarily,
Okay.
but try to restrict us in our sub-regions, which we have fought back. It's a very tricky situation. I don't think it's going to direct war, but yes, I definitely think that they will try to challenge US hegemony as far as Taiwan is concerned.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh. You wanted to say something, sir?
Let me say that I think it will be self-delusional to say that there is no asymmetry. What we export to China is $14 billion compared to the trade of $136 billion. Within that, what we export maximum, 22% of our exports is iron ore. Asymmetry is up in the face, 6 times economy, 4 times defense budget, military modernization. We have to be realistic in looking at what China is doing in terms of expanding technology. It's making technology dependencies around the world, infrastructure dependencies around the world. India has its own advantages of Western world willing to kind of stand by us to compete with China. I'm not saying we have no disadvantages. And last 10 seconds, asymmetry is not simple, weak and strong relationship. In asymmetric relationships, weaker powers also have their unique strengths which can really be utilized.
Okay.
I was talking about asymmetry between China and United States, not between China and India.
Okay.
As far as China and India is concerned, I am convinced there is an asymmetry as far as conventional is concerned as well as nuclear.
Okay.
That is my.
Okay, thank you. I've really run short of time. Thank you, Ambassador Mukherjee. Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh, for joining me. So this was on point 1. On point 2 is about the plan that the aviation minister is talking about. But after a short break.
$25 लाख का हॉस्पिटल बिल है, इतने पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे?
पैसों की चिंता आप मत कीजिए पापा।
मैम, सर का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस क्लेम अप्रूव हो गया है।
आप
पॉलिसी बाजार